We are meeting on the country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today, and we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations who are present with us. Apologies and leave of absence. I have a message saying that Councillor Moran will be late. Other than that, I've received no other apologies. Confirmation of the minutes. I seek a mover and a seconder to confirm the minutes are a true and accurate record. Thank you, Councillor Sims. Seconded, Councillor Ho. Any discussion, members? Put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That is carried. All right, we'll move on to 4, the discussion forum items. And the first item up, 4.1, is a presentation on the Free City Connector service and an update. And I'll just pass to the CEO to kick us off for that. Councillor Kouros, if you can just turn on your camera, you'll then be recorded as present. And I'll just unmute you, Mark. When you're ready.
Thanks, Chair. Just before this matter is discussed, it is an important topic tonight, and it's going to be really important for you to have a good understanding of what's being presented to you. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to remind members of the current financial position of Council, and recognise that we're currently in the process of addressing the impacts of COVID-19, and we're assessing all aspects of Council operations. I just want to remind you of the resolution of Council that the Executive is to seek a $20 million reduction in operating expenditure, and we are currently working through that across the organisation. I just ask that you consider the presentation that you're about to receive in that context, as there are a number of kind of service delivery options that will be put forward to you tonight for information and consideration. Further to that, I just want to explain to you that there is no decision tonight. It's just a presentation, and this matter is going to be referred to the committee on the 2nd and then to Council on the 9th. At those times when we'll be making some decisions. So it's really just an information presentation tonight, but I just ask you to think about the financial context within which we operate. What I'd like to now do is to hand over to Clinton to do a bit more of a preamble. Thanks, Clinton.
Thanks, members. Through you, Chair. As Mark just said, the session is just to present an update on the status of the Free City Connector bus. Also designed just to inform Council on the options in front of you in preparation for a report to the committee planned for the 2nd of June and then Council on the 9th of June. There is an opportunity here to consider cost versus benefit to the community and Council has the opportunity to shape what services it wishes to provide in regards to free public transport to its city ratepayers and the like. So that's the preamble. I'll let Daniel Keller and Shanti Ditta present the information to you now. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Clinton, and thank you, Mark. Today's presentation, we're just going to briefly take you through some of the background of the City Connector service, the current service route, the proposed service route that DIPTI are proposing, some of the costs of us operating the service and what we contribute to DIPTI, impacts of COVID-19 and some possible options. Apologies. Oh, here we are. So the current service was introduced in around 2014, which services the City of North Adelaide every 15 to 30 minutes, 7 days a week. It was in collaboration with DIPTI, and this service followed a previous council-only run service. The service provides for 17,000 to 18,000 passengers in the usual month, and that increases during some of the peak months around the festival season. Obviously, a lot more people out and about. DIPTI manages the service on our behalf or in collaboration with DIPTI, and it's bundled up in their metropolitan east-west service, and the current provider of the service is Torrens Transit. The City of Adelaide contributes 3 buses to run the service. So we've got Tindo, the green electric bus, and we've also got 2 diesel buses which are in the fleet to operate the service as well. The current deed for the service is due to expire at the end of 2023. However, the Minister, as part of some network operation and efficiency improvements, has provided notice to terminate the deed in June of this year. So it provides us an opportunity now to look at what do we want to do with the service. DIPTI are planning on undertaking some community consultation in May/June, and that's on the metro-wide service, including the connector route.
Just having trouble with moving our slides, Jenny.
The current route, as I mentioned, operates every 15 to 30 minutes. So it's 30 minutes through the North Adelaide loop and every 15 minutes in the city loop. There's quite a lot of duplication with some other bus and particularly free tram public transport services in the city, particularly Curry Street, King William Street, Hutt Street, Morpeth Street and North Terrace. You can see that on the figure by the blue line's the city connector, the orange line is the free city tram, and the metro buses are the green. So you can see that there's quite a lot of duplication in that network. But the current network does service a lot of the key destinations, including central markets, the universities, the zoo, 5 of our squares in the city in North Adelaide, the main streets being O'Connell, Melbourne and Hutt, and it services a lot of the residential areas in North Adelaide and the south end of the city as well. So the review that DIPTI undertook was based on some of the patronage data, but it was also based on trying to take out some of the duplication in the network as well. This figure on the right-hand side is the draft proposal we've received from DIPTI. So essentially, they're proposing it runs on a 20-minute frequency in each direction. So it would provide an increased frequency in North Adelaide, however, a slight reduction in frequency in the city itself. It does remove duplication with the tram, but it does provide interchanges at Victoria Square, City South and at the Botanic Gardens for interchanges. The current Montefiore Hill, Hill Street and Jerningham Street and King William sections would be removed and there'd be some operational savings. So some of this was based on patronage. So there were some sections of Morpeth Street up to North Adelaide, Montefiore Hill Road, where patronage was very low. So this takes that out and focuses on some of the areas of higher patronage, but it does reduce the coverage. The cost of operation of the service to council, obviously this is co-funded by council and the Department for Transport. We fund approximately $940,000 per year. 872 is contribution to DIPTI to operate the service, and that's indexed each year. We pay $8,000 approximately for electricity for charging Tindo on a daily basis. There's some bus registration and then an allocation for maintenance of the buses itself. We supply 3 buses to run the service, which obviously when the buses reach the end of their economic life or need major maintenance, we need to cover the cost of that as well. We've just done a brief comparison of the cost of the service versus some other services in Australia. First one is cost per service kilometre. We're paying approximately $22 per kilometre that the service runs. Other metropolitan cities in Australia are less than half of that. And then the cost per passenger works out to around $7 per passenger that the state and City of Adelaide are subsidising for each trip. And that's slightly higher than other cities. City of Adelaide bus fleet, as I mentioned, we own Tindo, which was purchased in 2007. It's had a major DDA compliance upgrade in 2014-15. We're responsible for replacement batteries every 5 years approximately. The batteries are sort of old technology, and an audit in 2019 highlighted that we'll need to replace most batteries within the next sort of 12 to 24 months. and that cost is in the order of $250,000 to $300,000. There's options for whether you replace with the same type or you upgrade, but then that your outlay varies, whether it's a staged or single outlay. And then we purchased 2 diesel buses back in 2014 for a cost of just under $1 million. And obviously with depreciation there, the value of them is around $600,000, but they do have a life expectancy of around 25 years. All general maintenance is undertaken through Torrens Transit. However, the major maintenance, particularly for Tindo, falls on the City of Adelaide. Due to COVID-19, the services were suspended in early April, along with some other metro services. Prior to the suspension of the service, patronage was down 70 to 80% lower than usual and compared to the same time last year. And it's noting that exact patronage data for the City Connector is not known as accurately as some of the other services because people don't have to tap their Metro cards on and off. So it's harder for us to get the data, but DIPTI do collect the data several times a year. Since the suspension, City of Adelaide and DIPTI have only received a handful of complaints from the public, and some of those complaints have been, how do I get from Hurdle Square to the Central Markets, or how do I get from down Sturt Street to the Central Markets? And a lot of those requests, most of those requests have been able to be covered by existing Metro services. And advice from DIPTI is there's no immediate plans to resume the service until further restrictions are eased. So obviously in June, July, something that sort of time frame. So we've now just summarised some options for the service. Obviously every option's got its own implications, whether it's financial, community, and obviously opportunities and risks as well. If we do continue funding the existing service, obviously we retain the known for the community. However, there's a risk that it's not supported by DIPTI because they're obviously wanting to try and remove some of the duplication that they've already invested in with the rest of their network, particularly the tram extension. And then we may need to fund the surplus for that. Obviously, the high service cost, as I spoke about before, compared to some other cities. If we co-fund the new route with DIPTI, it does remove tram duplication. It integrates still with the Metro network. There is a reduction in coverage, particularly the western side of North Adelaide. Melbourne Street is a bit of a gap as well. And Morfett Street is a gap in sort of the northwestern part of the city itself. This option with the reduced route would have cost savings compared to the existing. But obviously then it's the reduced coverage. So it's a bit of the balance between coverage versus dollars. There's another option. We could look to work with DIPTI to replace the bus service with an on-demand service, given most people have access to Metro cards. Seniors have access to Seniors card, which gives them free public transport between 9 and 3 on weekdays and every day on a weekend anyway. I understand DIPTI have been trialling some of this in some areas already. However, the trials have been cut short due to COVID. So maybe that's something we could look at as well. Obviously, that would deliver us some cost savings over the life. And obviously, we could redirect or look at what we do with the buses we've bought. And then the last option sort of follows on from the motion I noticed last week is potentially diverting funds elsewhere and obviously cancelling the service, but still discussing with DIPTI about making public transport within the city free and City and North Adelaide free. So then there's no need for us to provide this additional service. This, however, does have a reputational risk to council, and there's obviously, we still need to get discussed with DIPTI about the feasibility of providing that free public transport in the city, but would deliver significant cost savings. Next steps, we're proposing to come back to the committee with the report on the 2nd of June, and then obviously work with DIPTI with whatever that decision is. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. We'll open it up. Councillor Sims.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. In terms of feedback, I'd be very concerned about plans to reduce the coverage of the free City Connector bus. You know, I think it's a key plank of the City Council's commitment to become a carbon neutral city, indeed one of the first in the world. We have a bike network that is incomplete. We've resisted moves to have any temporary bike paths set up and pop-up bikeways. When I say we, I mean the council as a majority has chosen to do that, certainly not my view. And so I think in that context, when we don't have that other investment in alternative green transport options, a free, well-resourced city connector bus is really, really important. We know that it's really well supported traditionally. Of course, at the moment, there are going to be less people on it, and I recognise that given we're in the middle of the pandemic. But going forward, and as part of our recovery, I think that service is going to be really, really important. I'd be very concerned if Councillor Knoll put forward his motion with a view that an advocacy piece of asking the state government for free transport would be a licence for us to cut our own free city connector bus in the city. I'm sure that wasn't Councillor Knoll's intention. Because it's going to take some time before the state government even look at what council has proposed, if indeed they're at a mind to roll out free transport. So I think we should be doing what we can do to provide that option to residents and ratepayers. And at a time when we're going to be struggling to get visitors to come into our city, anything that makes Adelaide a more attractive place, I think we need to look at, and free transport is one of those things. So my view is it is costly, but it's worth the investment for the city.
All right, I've done what you do, Sandy. Lord, please, you were unmuted.
Sorry, I could see I was unmuted, but I wasn't sure if you were.
Yeah.
Looking at these, at the two, you know, the current routes and the suggested route. I mean, obviously, if we can advocate for Councillor Knoll's motion in terms of free transport throughout the city, the network would be incredible, and I actually think that would be one of the best outcomes we could possibly get. But there are two areas, and I don't know if you can see this if I put this up like that, that worry me. They're both in North Adelaide. So I'm sort of concerned about the area that is missed in terms of the mid-block of what you would call lower North Adelaide. So if it went down sort of McKinnon and then down Jerningham and back around that way. And there's also an area where it would go down Ward Street past the hospital and past the schools and back to the square, which is sort of that square in North Adelaide. I'd also like to understand how the proposed network, so in terms of the realignment on this side coming from the city, that makes perfect sense to me. But to me, there's two blocks there that are being being missed out on. And I'm also keen to see how we are servicing the northwest around Light Square. What would be great, I don't know whether you could do it, Daniel or Shanti, if we could have an overlay of where the increase in residential in particular has been in the city over, or what's in the pipeline. I know we've got the 3D, but if we could actually have a look around that residential. I mean, I know the Balfours is there and there's quite a bit around Light Square and Weymouth Street. I'd just be really keen to understand if that's serviced by any other transport. So I do know that the universities have their own shuttles. We have aged care sort of shuttles that take people to the market, etc. So I'm just sort of trying to work out if there's any other overlays that we could have a look so that would make sense of a complete network. The shuttles from the university also pick up at the colleges in North Adelaide, I believe. So I'm just really keen to understand the full picture. And the other one I'm really curious about is the on-demand service, as to, like, I would love us to do something really progressive that, looks at something where we literally have a service at our fingertips as we want. I'd be keen to know where else that is working and how is that working, to see whether that's something that we could also approach. I do understand the duplication. I don't think there needs to be duplication, but I think the connection and the increase of the frequency is going to be a great thing. But I do think we need to retain as much connection as we can. That's it.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Councillor Knoll? Sorry, I think we're having a mute war.
I'll try that.
That's better.
My screen is frozen, so it's a bit hard. But looking at it, the Lord Mayor's comment, certainly Jenningham is certainly important. And if you're going to do a service up there, because I know that does then cover North Adelaide a lot better. The frequency, sorry, it's just I came in a bit late because I was at the other. What is the frequency level that you're going to be running these at, or with the expected? You got that? How often will the service run?
The service is proposed to run with a 20-minute frequency in both directions. So
Okay.
at the moment, it's 30 minutes in the North Adelaide loop and 15 minutes in the city. So this would make it an improved frequency for North Adelaide, but a slightly reduced frequency in the city itself.
Yeah. Okay. And other than that, for this as a service, but again, if we had other options, it would be really reasonable to find out what that's like. So, but otherwise, I mean, for what you're trying to offer, I think it's close to the mark. And I mean, you know, the numbers that you've had across on Montafort, etc. So I make the assumption that this is the most economic service that you can provide. Thank you.
Franz. Helen, you should be unmuted.
Thanks. Do we have any modelling, I know it's a new service, but on the outcomes of the on-demand option, both in terms of the perception by the public, but also on the quality of the service provision?
No, we haven't. Obviously, DIPTI have started a bit of a trial, and I think they were looking at a trial in Mount Barker and possibly the Barossa, but it was very early days when those trials had just started and then COVID took off. So we haven't got any information about the success of those and how that might be able to be applied to the city itself. Obviously, the city is a totally different ballgame than what some of those more regional areas are, where public transport in a traditional sense isn't as appropriate as what it might be elsewhere.
Sorry, Shanti, go on.
And there are cities in the world where on-demand transport services are being utilised. So we could try and get some intelligence from those cities as well.
And I think it's difficult to consider any decision making in the absence of the city access strategy and whatever is proposed in that. Is there an opportunity to consider this decision within the context of the city access strategy?
Certainly we can look at that and bring something back into council.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the on-demand would be an interesting one to explore if there is any evidence to suggest that it would be applicable and beneficial in this setting, so that it's more of an addition rather than a subtraction, in the sense of potentially offering more locations and more a better delivery option rather than taking anything away. I guess though within that, and from what you as the experts in the room know, is there anything from the options presented in terms of on demand, the reduced, or any of the other options? Is there anything else you'd add in terms of your suggested best approach? Transport planners, wise ones.
What's been presented in the table that we shared earlier is where the thinking is at the moment. We can go away and do some further exploratory work particularly on the on-demand side of things, and come back to you with some further information as we find it. We haven't really thought of any other options other than those options for the service that are there on the table.
In terms of the replacing it with an on-demand service, would you say with the evidence known to date that it's worth further exploration of that option at this point?
Taking all other things away, the issue of cost obviously has to come into it, and the question of access to that service is really important. So we would need to understand both those things first before progressing or advising one way or another.
Okay, thanks.
Members, are there any other points of discussion on this? Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Look, it's pretty clear that free transport is not on the table in this discussion. On-demand bus services and the like are not on the table. What is on the table is a proposal to reduce funding, to reduce services, particularly to parts of North Adelaide and other parts of the city. And at the same time, we now have on the table at this time, and I was not aware of it, a proposal by the Minister for Transport to terminate the deed that allows this shared service to continue as at June 2020. So what is on the table is what's being proposed. That is that we are effectively bailing out and providing a diminished service. And it's being put to us in the context that this is required in order to somehow bail the city out of the financial strife it's in. And at the risk of repeating myself over and over again, because of the continued operating deficits that have been produced by Team Adelaide over the years. This seems to me...
Councillor Martin, I've muted you. That is because, one, you've made a completely incorrect statement. Notwithstanding the existence of Team Adelaide, it hasn't existed over the years. And in fact, you were on council during the operational deficits, which you're constantly discussing. So look, I won't ask you to correct your statement because I know that you won't. Nevertheless, no, Councillor Simms, we're not debating this point. I just need that point of clarification made clear before we continue. And if you continue to make points which are completely inaccurate, I'll continue to mute you and request that you correct the record or cease making those statements. Please continue.
And you, Chair, as the leader of Team Adelaide, have an enormous conflict of interest, which is obvious and apparent to everyone who's watching this. But I'll proceed. And what I want to say...
Councillor Martin, there is no conflict of interest here because there's no decision being made, ergo there is no conflict of interest. That's my second warning. If you go for a third time, we'll move on. Please continue.
Chair, you are debating. I will not enter into debate with you. I've said all I need to say about that. But what is happening is that this decision will inconvenience a great many people for whom the service has become not only a lifeline to connect to various parts of the city, but also for businesses who rely upon it. And let's not forget, this service is promoted as a tourist service, enabling people to crisscross the city and visit various locations and to patronise businesses. this is a most provocative move. It will be disliked, deplored by a great many people who will see this as inopportune. I can't agree to it. I won't agree to it. And I think this council ought to be making a great deal of noise to the minister rather than trying to accommodate him as we appear to be doing. Let's not lie down and take this as though it's, you know, just a slight inconvenience. This is a serious matter. And I will just say in conclusion, by the way, Chair, because I know you will mute me, but the father of the Minister for Transport shouldn't be in the room.
Councillor Sims,
Thanks, Deputy Lord Mayor. Look, I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Martin's point about, I think we should push back on the Minister regarding the government's plans to cut funding for this service. As members might recall, I think it was last year when this was first mooted, Council endorsed a motion that I put forward to say that we're going to look at options to retain the service and also to lobby the state government to continue to fund this. And I think we should continue to do that and maintain that campaigning and advocacy position, because I think this is a vital service for residents across the city, but also for people who visit the city. And whilst at the moment we're in very unusual circumstances in terms of reduced patronage and the service is not operational at the moment while we're in the middle of the pandemic, which I assume is saving some money for council and the government as well. I do want to see us having public transport play a key part of, you know, keeping people connected to the city and moving around once the pandemic finishes. And we're going to have a challenge to bring people into the city, to be able to attract visitors and so on. And anything that moves people around town, helps them visit local businesses, I think we need to look at. So I just wanted to reinforce that point, that I think that advocacy exercise is really worthwhile in terms of keeping pressure on the government, because this is an important service that council operates in partnership with them, and I think they need to uphold their part of the bargain.
Robert.
Sorry, I'll unmute.
Thanks, Chair. I'll simply say that I think that now more than ever before, it's imperative that we rationalise the service. If the administration wishes to present material that creates much greater efficiencies, particularly noting the per passenger cost that seems quite uncommonly high. It's extremely high from the looks of it compared to other services. But I'm in full support of properly rationalising this service. This is what our ratepayers want. In fact, it is actually incumbent on us in the current situation to do our best to rationalise the service. It's all about patronage. Where there are low patronage areas of use, they must be properly rationalised. The on-demand service is obviously something we all want to see looked into. It sounds interesting. We must have more information on that. But generally speaking, I'm in full support of the administration in making this an actual efficient service that ultimately benefits, not hinders ratepayers, particularly given the massive hit to our income.
Thank you, Jesse. Members, are there any further contributions on this topic? All right, I've just got a few questions I'd like to ask. The first one, noting Councillor Sims' points around when this came up last time. Now, I must admit, I thought we were going to have something a little bit more substantive at this point when it comes to talking about the route, and I was really hoping for some data to be overlaid with it, because, I mean, yes, our cost per person is very high, but if we're not having stops at the areas where there have been the most amount of residential growth recently, if they're as yet unserviced, then of course your cost per person is going to be high, and the high cost per person comes back to the fact that we have a very, very low population as a capital city, and that is actually the same for public transport across the greater metropolitan area, which is also an issue. So I know it came up before, but can we just confirm we haven't overlaid residential growth with the current map yet?
No, we haven't.
Okay. So I know this is a workshop recommendation and what have you, and we want to get moving on this, but I do think we really, to make it the best possible decision, I think we need to see that so that we can understand who needs to be serviced. And I know sort of in the corners of my ward, in the northwestern part of my ward, there's a couple of new apartment buildings that have gone up. And I don't think they've got any public transport there, judging by the map that I'm looking at. I have been fielding inquiries from members of the public who are concerned that the service isn't currently running. They do use it to get around on a daily, if not a few times a week basis. And the issue is, particularly when it comes to Halifax and Sturt Street, that there are no buses that go down there. And not preempting where we land, but it would be a particularly bad case if this service were to be cut, because people down there would have nothing at all by way of public transport. And that's really bad for accessibility. And it's really bad when it comes to trying to get people to and from businesses, to and from school. I know there's other councillors that have had residents in the area complain that they can't get their kids to school and they go to school in the city. So I just want that to be in the front of your minds as well when it comes to drafting recommendation. But what I would say, broadly speaking, as well, is that I can't accept that the service is still closed. I think other public transport services are operating. They're operating in a reduced capacity, but there are large parts of the city and there are thousands and thousands of people who have very limited and unacceptably low level access to public transport at the moment. And that's not a very good outcome. As we are easing restrictions, I would have thought a reinstatement of the City Connector would be one of the first things, not least of all because based on the figures you've shown us, we're still paying for it, which is the other thing I'd like to interrogate a bit as well. Sorry, Jenny, if we could just get the cost breakdown back up on the screen. If that's possible. But I was just Daniel and Shanti, could you just confirm that the 872, the 8K in electricity, the 7K in registration, and the 50K in maintenance, those are our costs that the City of Adelaide bears? And then,
that's correct.
And then DIPTI contribute as well, or on top of that?
That's correct.
That's correct. I'm just a bit, and look, I'm a novice when it comes to this space, but the first thing I'd highlight is that we're paying 50K for maintenance. Is that just for Tindo? Is that the yearly maintenance for Tindo?
So that's it.
Sorry, it said Torrens Transit handled the diesel buses.
So the 50K maintenance is a budget that is there for in case there's any major maintenance required on the buses. So for example, the Tindo's batteries that are needed to be replaced, that does come out of that budget there. The Torrens Transit, who operate the buses, they do all the minor maintenance like oil changes and tyres and the minor sort of stuff, but we need to cover the major stuff.
Yeah, no, understood. And I'm really perplexed as to how, if we've bought the buses and you've got maintenance covered here separately, obviously wages would be a significant input to that. Is the majority of that 872,000, is the majority of that wages? Because if we're paying 872,000 just to get DIPTI to operate the service, and they're putting in money over and above that, it's only 3 buses we're talking about. I'm just shocked that it actually comes to that figure. Do you have any sort of a breakdown of that figure?
So whilst we contribute 3 buses to the service, DIPTI or Torrens Transit supply the other buses that run in the service. So I think there's a total of 6 buses that run in the service. So obviously that 872, our contribution plus DIPTI's covers the wages obviously operational cost of the buses, including fuel, maintenance, housing.
Okay.
That's all the costs I'm aware of. We can seek some further clarification on that.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like a lot. And when we talk about finding savings, sort of that sort of figure would be, and I know you've proposed shortening the route, which is perhaps less than ideal, but I don't know. It just seemed like a lot. So I would have a greater peace of mind if our administration could give a better and more detailed breakdown of that figure, because to me, it does seem a little bit inflated, personally. Nevertheless, obviously, in reading the sentiment of the room and my own as well, is that this is a vital community service, and it needs to continue. We can't be scaling it back, and we can't use the cloak of COVID as a means to scale it back either. I think certainly we should be looking at the best possible service, and where it's inefficient, we need to be finding how we can get more people onto it to make it more valuable to us. And so it's more valuable to more ratepayers and visitors and residents in the city. So, and I just worry that it's been over 12 months and that we still haven't done that meaningful part of it yet. Which is, if we want to talk about the route, that's still well and good, but let's talk about how we can service people that are not that into the discussion as well, instead of just sort of being held over a barrel and saying we need to find savings. They're reviewing it as well, and so this is what we've come up with. So, but otherwise, the presentation was highly informative. So thank you very much for that. And just to check, no other members wish to contribute on this. Councillor Martin, your hand is up. Did you have a question?
Want to ask a question. If there's to be a further discussion on the 2nd of June, could the administration provide us with details of patronage for each of the stops? That information has been provided to previous councils, and the most recent figures would be useful.
We can provide that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sims?
Deputy Lord Mayor, I just wanted to reinforce your point. I agree with you on that. I think we're on the same page. I think it is really important that this is funded. I think a lot of people in the community rely on it. And I don't want to see the service lost. So yes, I just wanted to express support for your view.
Councillor. And speaking about people in the community, it was remiss of me to forget my remarks on the on-demand service, which, while it does sound promising, I have concerns regarding accessibility, which I think was alluded to as well by you, Shanti. I really wouldn't want to disenfranchise the vulnerable in the community from being able to access this service. And when I'm thinking about the vulnerable, I'm thinking about the elderly. So I don't know if an on-demand service would work via an app, or whether it's a phone call, or whether it has both options. But certainly being able to go to a bus stop and be sure that a bus is going to come, as opposed to the rigmarole of dialing up or trying to work a smartphone when you're not necessarily tech savvy. So I'm really concerned about accessibility for an on-demand service. Obviously, on-demand services are being trialled in regional areas because there is less demand, and that works out to be more efficient in the city. You'd expect to see enough demand to make it efficient, but it's still keen to see the figures of what comes back. And also with regards to accessibility, we know that particularly in South Ward, there's a lot of at-risk people and vulnerable or homeless people as well that use the service to get around South Ward and to get to all the social service providers in South Ward. And so we wouldn't want to disenfranchise them either by having another barrier to accessing the public transport. So just on the on-demand services, my views there. But apologies, one last check to councillors if there's any contributions to be made. No hands are up. We're all happy. Okay, thank you, Daniel and Shanti.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to 4.2, which is a presentation on data and insights, which we're keenly awaiting. And I believe Claire is going to lead us off in that one. Claire? So I'm trying to find you to unmute you. Jenny, if you can. feel free to.
Thank you. You can hear me, but you can't see me. I can't follow my video.
Oh, you are right there.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly, please.
All right, I'll just talk, and hopefully in the meantime someone can find the video. It's disappeared. No. It's because Jenny, you've handed over the slide to me already. Can you just take control back? Sorry. Okay. Beautiful. Now hand back again. Thank you. So COVID-19 was first confirmed in Australia in late January 2020, and to date, the number of cases in Australia is just a touch over 7,000, and South Australia's cases count for just 6.2% of the national total. And as you'd all be aware, there have been no new cases reported since the 7th of May. SA Pathology has undertaken nearly 80,000 tests to date, and there's still a priority around ongoing assessment and testing of our community at large. And so not only is Adelaide one of the most livable cities in the world, I think we can also start to lay claim to being one of the safest cities in the world. On the 8th of May, the Premier announced the South Australian Roadmap for easing COVID-19 restrictions, and obviously those started from the 11th of May, and the effect's been pretty instant. We're starting to see restaurants and cafes reopening to offer outdoor dining. Our workers are coming back to the city. We're seeing shoppers returning to the retail precincts, and communities are back into the playgrounds, the parklands, and now with Tint Street and Hutt Street libraries open, they're also being well used by the community. And so while recovery will be gradual, we're pretty optimistic about the future, and we're working closely with state government to reactivate and re-energise our city, and Ian will share more details of that with Christy shortly. Before Ian and Christy share that, we have Megan Fink with us to go through some of the insights. This is the second of a planned series that we kicked off with you in February, a planned series of data and insight presentations. So back in February, we took you through a workshop looking at some of the sources of the data that we use to make sure that the decisions that we bring through to you and the reports are underpinned by sound data. And those insights were arranged under the categories of people, economy, culture and the environment. And then we finished sharing with you some of the tools that are available, the City of Adelaide Community Profile and the Economic Insights Dashboard. So for those of you that do have spare time, I'd encourage you to go online and have a look at those tools. So Megan, tonight, the presentation focuses on the impacts of the current pandemic on people and economies. And so some topics from February, like international education, wellbeing, and the value of the local economy are being revisited. And the insights around what is changing and the landscape in which we're now working to recover our city. Megan will take you through some of those insights now. So I'll hand over to Megan, and she will come online. Thank you. Have I got control? Yeah. Oh, lovely. Thank you. No. So Jenny, sorry, I don't mind, Jenny can do it. The slides aren't moving for us, so I don't know if
I think you should need to accept something. It's saying to me that it's waiting for you to control your screen. So is there an alert that says to accept the remote control on the page with your Zoom meeting participants and so on? Otherwise, I can drive it for you. But yeah, you need to accept it, I believe. So it should be, there should be a toolbar that says.
Yeah, it says we can control you, but nothing's.
Okay, maybe I'll just have to drive it. It could be, it's telling me that we're waiting. Do you want me just to drive it, Claire?
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jenny.
sorry.
Sure, no worries.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. So I'll start, thank you, Claire. We'll start with some information about what the situation looks like locally, nationally, internationally, and then we'll have a deeper look at some of the areas that might be of particular interest to the city and to the state. I'm unlikely to talk to everything that's on the slides, so if you do have questions, please ask away, although I admit I'm not quite sure how that's going to work in this forum, but the offer still stands. So
yeah, we'll do them. Sorry, we'll do them at the end. So if people can make a note.
So fundamentally, we're facing the worst economic contraction since the Great Depression. But the key difference this time seems to be how rapidly that is occurring compared to previous situations like that. So the downturn is happening over a period of just a few months rather than over a number of years. And it seems that the hope is that the overall duration will be shortish, and certainly the support packages that have been introduced by various levels of government are geared to that expectation. But fundamentally, so the data on this slide gives a bit of a detail about what's happening in the city, what's happening at national level, and what's happening overseas. And for the city, the fundamental thing is that the face of our city is really changing. And that's been most obvious in the fact that you've come to the city over the last few months and there's been a lack of people on the streets. It's really obvious that the businesses have closed, they've moved to limited opening models, they've moved to shorter opening times, all the theatres, venues, the attractions, there's no events. The major draw cards for city visitation disappeared in a very short space of time. And then we've seen thousands of businesses apply for the $10,000 emergency cash grants for small business. At the national level, the prediction is that $50 billion wiped off the national economy by the end of June, and economic output down by about 10%. And of course, further afield, other major economies are shrinking. So the US economy, annual rate down 4.8% when it had been expected to grow, and China also down by 6.8%. Thanks, Jenny. The other thing I should add to that is that it's probably worth knowing that the economic situation was already weakening in any case. So in Australia, we already had GDP growth below 2%, slow wage growth and business investment, and low consumer confidence, which was already affecting spending, and high rates of unemployment, especially for younger people. Now, thinking about the economy, so in 2018-19, the city economy was worth about $19.45 billion. That was about 19% of the state's economy. So this slide just shows some data around the contribution from the Adelaide Convention Bureau in that year, and also at the bottom, the industries that were providing the most value add in the city economy, led by financial insurance services. And of course, all of these sectors have been impacted quite hard, but perhaps the most obvious impacts are in accommodation and food services. Thanks, Jenny. And we can see that, one of the ways we can see that is through changes in spending. So what happened is, COVID hit us and we saw an almost immediate change in the way that people were spending. So we upped our spending significantly on grocery items and reduced our spending on items which, when it comes right down to it, we don't really need. So while Australian retail turnover went up 8.5% in March, this was due to the large increase in spending on groceries, largely. Other retailing was also up over 16% and household goods up 9%. But at the same time, what we saw was this big downturn in spend in cafes, restaurants and takeaway food, and on clothing, footwear and personal accessories. They were both down by about 23%. So what does that mean for the City of Adelaide? Well, most businesses in our city are small and medium enterprises, and unfortunately they're the ones least likely to come back from adverse circumstances. And we've got about 1,000 accommodation and food service businesses and 900 or so retail trade businesses, and we can expect that most of them have been hit pretty hard. And depending on what happens with reopening and people being able to operate more in the ways that they used to, we may see the reduction in local demand persist for quite some time.
And of course, the staged easing of restrictions on restaurants and cafes means that some can't viably reopen just yet. But there may also be opportunities. So some of those opportunities may be to connect the needs of the city with startups and small and medium enterprises whose capacity is the best able to address them. How can we do that? What can we do to retain some of the changes that we've seen that people may really have appreciated, like the Adelaide Central Market offering home delivery and phone ahead and pick up? And how can we foster online sales to assist businesses to engage with their customers more in that way? On the right-hand side of the slide, we've got the statistic about accommodation and food services jobs in South Australia. And between mid-March to mid-April, the number of jobs in that sector is down in South Australia by about 40%. And economic modelling for our city shows that local jobs are forecast to fall by 7.6%, or around 11,000 jobs in the current quarter. And this is a concern for a couple of reasons. So there's the immediate impact on the income of people who are out of work, but it's also what unemployment means. So unemployment carries a risk of long-term disengagement from the workforce. We know that older workers who lose their jobs are less likely to work again. And we know that youth unemployment is typically far higher than overall unemployment. And this matters to our city, given something we've talked about in one of these forums before, about the makeup of a residential population. We have more older people and more younger people than other places. And we actually see this demographic effect in the economic modelling again, with the number of employed residents expected to go down by 9.5%, or a couple of percentage more than the proportion of jobs to be lost. Thanks, Jenny. So international education, revisiting from February. So some of this will be familiar. So international education was our top export in South Australia. $1.92 billion was the estimate, and about 44,000 international enrolments. So about 25% of all university students in South Australia were international students. And China was our main source market, although we're receiving strong growth from the other countries listed on the slide. Thanks, Jenny. So now the situation has changed quite dramatically, with a lot of students actually not being able to reach us for the start of the education year. And there's a couple of big impacts on that for us. So perhaps the first is that there's the estimate that for every $1 lost in university tuition fees, it's another $1.15 lost in the broader economy due to international student spending. But it's also about the fact that a missed intake of students reverberates for several years, because it disrupts the pipeline of students. So an international student would typically come and study here for 2 or 3 years. So the revenue impact accumulates, multiplies over that time. So we can say it's a big hit, but it doesn't have to be a permanent one if we can engage with some of these challenges around retaining our position in the international education marketplace, continually improving the student experience in whatever form education now takes.
Sorry to interrupt. How much longer of this is left? I'm just conscious it's very informative, but a lot of members are aware of some of the data. So how much?
I would say we're about halfway.
Okay. If you could sort of halve the time you're spending on each slide, that'd be good. Just the headlines for us.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Jenny, can we move on? Let's skip that one. So what we're seeing is this disruption to our normal calendar of events. And there's an estimation that we've lost 19% of jobs across Australia in the arts and culture industry in the 3 weeks from the 14th of March to the 4th of April. And I guess one of the impacts is when things pick up again is what will people's attitudes be to going back to venues in any case. Some people may not be willing to go back to normal just yet, but it is about making the best of the situation and embracing those opportunities. So we've seen artists making their performances available more online. Here in Adelaide, the ASO has regularly posted short performances by its musicians, and there'll be many other examples of that. So what will arts and cultural experiences look like for audiences in the future? And what does it mean for venue management? Is digital delivery of arts and cultural experiences going to be more common? And how can we support that The Adelaide Cabaret Festival is going to celebrate its 20th year entirely online next month. And there's the opportunity to consider what more can be done to build local artistic endeavour. Thanks, Jenny. So it's also really interesting to know what people are doing and thinking as we move into the sort of recovery phase. So this slide shows some of the results from the ABS Household Impacts of COVID-19 surveys. They've been doing these regularly. And this one focused on how people were feeling. So the data on the right-hand side is from that survey, and the data on the left-hand side is the responses given to the same questions when they were asked a couple of years ago in the National Health Survey. And what we can see is that there's a far greater propensity for people to feel restless or fidgety or to feel nervous. That doesn't sound too surprising, does it? It's exactly what you would expect in an uncertain environment. But we can also expect this to change over time as the situation settles. Thanks, Jenny. So this one's it's more about the effects of people, what they're doing and their attitudes. So on the left-hand side are some results from the survey of residents of Metropolitan Adelaide by local company Square Holes. It shows that 43% believe that the next 12 months will be worse than now, 36% expect their financial security to worsen, and 21% were feeling a decline in wellbeing. Again, not unexpected in an environment of considerable uncertainty. And if those questions were asked again, we would expect possibly already to be seeing some change in those responses. On the right-hand side of the results of this survey by Vox Pop Labs in collaboration with the ABC, and they asked people what they thought they would do post-COVID and what timeframe they thought normality would return. And what it shows fundamentally is we may be hesitant to venture out of our homes or gather in large groups, even when we are able to. So only about 1 in 8 Australians would attend a large event, even if they could. Fewer than 1 in 5 will get on a plane, and only 40% will go to a bar or restaurant. This data is useful because it tells us how people behave will influence what governments at all levels do to help business and households beyond the immediate crisis. Thanks, Jenny. So this isn't in the slide pack that was distributed because we just got this and put it in yesterday. And we've talked throughout this about the absence of people in the city. So there's sensors positioned around the city that detect mobile devices, and this is what the data looks like. So this chart is showing us the counts every day from the 1st of February to 2 days ago, Sunday the 17th of May. And we can see the sudden and dramatic impact in March, around the 20th, 21st, when workplaces started to go more remote and food and beverage businesses and retail stores started to close their doors. And then in late April and early May, as you move towards the right-hand side, we start to see more movement and now a slight upward trajectory. And we'll be able to see how this progresses over time. Thanks, Jenny. So this is just the sources that we've used and some pointers as to where more information can be found. There's new data and information available regularly. The ABS is putting out doing special survey work really often. Data like retail sales and labour force statistics come out monthly. And the economic modelling that we have access to for our city is being updated regularly as new information becomes available. So we'll continue to provide this to you in various ways. And we should expect to see changes quite quickly now that the situation appears to be stabilising. That's it, Jenny.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that informative discussion. Members, did we have any questions of that data and those insights? Or did you perhaps have insights of your own? Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Maybe not so much insights of my own, but I did actually attend a webinar, a KPMG webinar, which I'm going to send you the link. It goes for about an hour, but it had some fantastic information in terms of what that might mean in terms of digital commerce and cashless societies and how people might be working. So I'd love to send that to you and feed that into your thoughts and the information that you're taking in at the moment as well.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Any other contributions? No, I might just make a very quick comment, and that's that one of the biggest things I hold concern about is, and it wasn't really in there, was the potential for property prices to fall, and not residential property prices. I'm talking about commercial property prices. As people realise that they can have their staff working from home, I'm concerned that we may see businesses shift their models of how they use the spaces that they've leased. And I'm concerned that a drop in demand over and above what might be the regular economic drop in demand due to the downturn, but a drop in demand over and above that because there is just, people have found other ways to work, other places to work, other ways for their workforce to go about doing what they do. I'm concerned that will have a knock-on effect for property prices, which of course has a knock-on effect for us. The City of Adelaide, as we know, we get 76% of our rates from commercial properties. It underpins absolutely everything we do, whether it's the community bus, whether it's our community grants to homelessness providers, all that sort of stuff. It's business rates that underpin that, and no small part of that are the commercial rates generated by property and particularly office spaces as well. So I think it's really important that we keep an eye on that, that we watch like a hawk on what happens to those, and wherever possible, we need to be doing modelling of what will happen to those in the future, so that we can inform our budget, and so that we can be aware, hopefully, ahead of time before there is such a downturn. I know I read somewhere in the paper today that we're going to see an 11% drop in residential prices, but still as yet nothing as far as businesses go. But I'm just conscious that a lot of landlords are very heavily leveraged. You know, they're not the rich robber barons that we think they are. And if they start to fall over, our rate base has serious issues. So it's something that we need to keep forefront of our mind when it comes to data and insights specifically. But thank you very much for that presentation. Just one last check, members, we're all good on that one. Okay, excellent. Thank you. We will now move on to 4.3, which is the workshop on recovery, and that word I'm not going to use because I don't like it, but it's a very worthy thing to do. I'll pass over to you, Ian. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sims, you're...
Sorry, Chair, just a procedural matter. And look, it's certainly very informative and interesting to get the updates from administration. But I'm just wondering, rather than us have the slide read to us, if it'd be possible for us to focus on the question and discussion component. I don't know about anybody else, but it's actually quite difficult being on Zoom for a really long period of time and just absorbing it in more of a lecture format. So it'd be good just to get a very short summary and then for us to focus on the discussion if possible.
Yes, and I think Ian and I had a discussion earlier today, and for this one at least, that's exactly what we're going to do. But obviously the administration have noted those comments based on the nods I'm seeing, so that feedback is taken on board. Thank you, Rob. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? You hear me all right? Yep. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Chair, through you. And thank you for the preamble, Councillor Sims. I totally agree. Look, tonight we've got some slides there. We're not going to go through the slide pack. I'll take the vast majority of that as read. We did really want to drill down into those two key questions around the recover and reimagine. So just by way of intro, this focuses a bit more on recover tonight. We're very keen to hear some ideas from elected members and from the constituents that you have regular contact with. Just by a quick way of recap, we did do the CEO update session on the 15th of April with you. I sent out a detailed email on the 30th of April. We've done the direct phone connection through Matt Halliwell to get your idea that ran in the press, which was great. And then the Lord Mayor has sent out some correspondence. And we've also gone live. I've only sent out an email this afternoon, but gone out live with a new community engagement tool around how we can garner information from the community. have definitely heard you guys loud and clear around how we should do more to get ideas from the community rather than present ideas to the community and then engage with them. So this is far more of a community-led approach to recovery. Is that a thumbs up? Yep, thank you. So we're very conscious of that. This tool is operational and we've already had some great responses from the community to that as a process. Just by way of snapshot, we've got about 70 ideas already that we've received from both elected members, some of our own staff, and we've been conscious to focus on frontline staff, to be honest. People are out there close to the community, whether that be early morning or out and about amongst some of our precincts and streets and parklands. So we will touch on a couple of those today, but ultimately this is about getting feedback from you. One final thing, just in terms of the lens for how we're assessing some of these ideas and what we're trying to do, we want to land some of these things quickly on the recover piece. So 3 things: impact, high impact early; cost. I think we're all conscious of and aware of the financial constraints at the moment, and still some unknowns around short-term future revenues. So we are mindful of cost and time. So how can we get this out pretty quickly? We're noticing some changes of people coming back to the marketplace. I think about 65% of the shops are open in the mall, for example. The central market's seeing some numbers come back. So impact, cost and time are the 3 lenses that we're looking at using, if that helps you all. So I'll just pass over to Christy very quickly, and then we really want to be drowned out by you tonight on some of your ideas.
Thanks, Ian. Through the chair, I just thought I'd give you a quick update on how we're proceeding, what sort of ideas we're receiving. We're theming and grouping the ideas at the moment. And Ian's pulled an interesting team together internally from across a lot of the different portfolios. And we're working with people from horticulture and finance and a group that wouldn't normally work together. And we're looking at the ideas, as he says, on actually, Jenny, if you just want to flick through, there's a little funnel. Yep, keep going, keep going. This is your tools, engagement ideas. This is how we're getting the ideas, this. So basically, all the ideas are coming through. We're meeting twice a week, and then there are working groups meeting outside of that time to look at all the ideas to say, okay, can we quickly do it? What's it going to cost and how long? So from that, you'll see in the next couple of weeks some funky winter lights, which I know Councillor Kouros is a motion on notice and is happening as part of the winter lights activation, as well, of course, with Councillor Martin's motion on notice. We're looking at restaurants, outdoor dining and what can be done very quickly, but also what will take a little bit longer because, of course, we're also putting the lens of stages of when restrictions will be lifted. There's some ideas on, next slide, Jenny. Keep going, thank you. This is the process. Some stuff that's happening in Rundle Mall, which you've seen in the slide deck, and the Central Market you know about. This one is a UPark Plus. There are now already 7,500 people who've signed up to UPark Plus to get the $8 daily car parking fee, and we think there's some real opportunity to turn that card into actually a kind of member opportunity, if you will. What can you use? What can we load up? What benefits can we use for businesses if you have that card? So there's exploration on that as one that's not just about activation. There's also a next slide, Jenny. There's the hashtag MyAdelaide's the campaign to message out. There's some lovely messages that you'll see in decals and around the street. It's heartfelt. It's about, people. Next slide, Jenny, and engagement. And here are some sort of themed ideas of how they're coming in. There's this mowing. That's something we can do with the team. Hearts and shapes. There's been quite a few captured ideas about cycling and walking, and of course lighting, and there's even one about perhaps us just giving some heaters out to help with the outdoor dining in a quick win to show some people some genuine opportunity to come back and have a seat outside even in the cold.
So let's go back to the first slide.
So let's go back to the first slide. Thanks, Jenny, which is about your ideas. Your ideas are the ones that you've given, Matt, are all captured in this and are being actioned, whether it's immediate because of what we can do or longer term into the reimagine phase. Sorry. So the question, back to the question. Thanks, Jenny, the very first slide. Sorry, I should put it at the end again. Yeah. There we go. More ideas from you and your community. we see you obviously as a portal into lots of other people. So have you got thoughts or ideas you'd like to share now? And if not, happy to talk to you offline at any time or others about what ideas you have. I've got a hand up there for Councillor Simms.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Ian. And thank you for your team for all the good work that you're doing. It's really exciting to see some of these things being looked at. So thank you very much for that. You would have seen through my comments that I provided for Matt's piece, I think it's really important at the moment that we look at what we can do to improve pedestrian access for the city and cycling access for the city at the moment. Mainly because, you know, we know that people are less likely to take public transport at the moment. There are lots of people out and about walking. And so I'd really like to look at what we can do in that space. In terms of a concrete suggestion, I've seen some cities around the world are looking at offering cycling classes for their residents as a way of promoting cycling. And I wonder if that's something that we could offer as part of the mix as an educative tool to get people thinking about cycling, getting active and moving around on the street. So that's an idea I'd love for you to be able to look at. I also think in terms of looking at what we can do to really promote our parklands and appreciation and enjoyment of those at the moment. You know, maybe there's an option to get some more exercise equipment attached to some of the playgrounds so that people can exercise outside at the moment. You know, ideas like that are encouraging people to be out and about using our public space, I think are really worthy of more consideration. So there's some of the things I'd really like to look at. And also recognising that I think whilst we're in this new environment, people are going to be shopping a lot more locally. And I think as a result, residents are going to be playing a really important role in terms of keeping our local businesses going, you know, the local cafe and so on. And anything that we can do as a council to promote some of our local corner stores, local cafes and so on to the residential base, I think could be really worthwhile. Letting people know what's available in terms of takeaway and so on. I know a lot of people have difficulty working out what restaurants are offering takeaway at the moment, what are offering delivery. Maybe there's some work that we can do in that space too. So that's a few ideas for you to think about.
Thank you very much. And actually they're not entirely unique. I'm sorry to tell you, Councillor Simms, some of those are already resonating with some thoughts that are in the tool. So that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Certainly people will be shopping very local if we don't give them their connector bus back. Lord Mayor. Let's try again.
Thank you. Well, I'm sort of very interested in some of the things that we can do quickly. I think it's the speed at which we can get things out is actually going to be our challenge. And some of these things already exist. It's actually how we represent it as activities, so such as street art walking tours. So given that at the moment the numbers are 10 and they're going to be 20 in a couple of weeks, we need to do things that actually can bring small groups of people together. Like Robert, I do think that we can do a whole lot of stuff with the parklands. And I was talking with some friends last week about a series of challenges that we could do, whether they are discovery courses or orienteering, mapped walks, mapped runs. Cherie, who works in finance, sent me through the Parklands walk, which is, I've actually sent that out to probably a dozen people already. And in fact, I have people that are doing that walk tomorrow. And it's just a matter of how we promote the assets that we've already got. The other one, which Ian, you were part of the meeting last week, but I did put it in the thing going forward, is the moving music, which was a fantastic event that Sam Wright did. but it's how we actually connect it to a food and wine offering and some other offerings. So moving music, for those of you that didn't know, was a project we did, Sam Wright did. He got funding through Splash, where he took small groups of people all through the city into sort of unusual places like, you know, back alleys and down laneways, and then there was be music performance. So he did one sort of on the little island in the middle of Rymel Park Lake, and he did one sort of out the back of Chester Street. And so things where people can, they're still moving, they can feel, there's a fantastic foodies tour that was going from the East End through the Central Market. I don't know if any of you have done that one, but it's, you know, a lot of it, rather than reinventing the wheel, it's gathering it up in a way that we can make a lot of noise about the way that people can rediscover the city. That's sort of what I'd like to see. And really sort of exploiting, well, exploiting is the wrong word, sort of amplifying sort of the assets that we've got at the moment. That's it.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Any other members with anything? I'm sure we can do better than that. Not that those ideas were no good. I'm just saying we can generate more, I'm sure. Thank you, Franz.
Yeah, it's something that we can bring again, and that was during the History Festival. You had a lot of history tours and that through the city. You know, one of them was about Germans, strangely enough. And perhaps something like that again would, while we're trying to do a whole host of bringing people into the city, we can use some of that which already exists in that area, so that we can, you know, again, we represent it and encourage people to go visit the city that way. I suppose it is just difficult to think about what can we surprise people with, how can they explore, what can we offer. And that's, I think we need to get closer to the businesses as well as putting in some sort of the sort of things that they can offer as well, because it's not just about coming to the city and doing you know, enjoyable things like that, but it's also re-engaging people with the business community and what they have to offer as well. And we do quite a lot of unique things. So there's, maybe it's one of those sort of projects we can do, is that we have unique businesses that are around the city, and some of them are, you know, clothing orientated to particular styles, you know, and also cultures. And maybe it's something like that. And again, that blends in with the rest by bringing them in for, you know, those sort of experiences as well, which is got, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not very specific, but again, it's just a bit of a broad brush.
Can I recap on that? What I'm hearing from both you and the Lord Mayor is, yeah, some focused attention on some of the clustering, if I will, or grouping of activities, such as if we were to have a real focus on the Parklands 4 weekends, on some, you know, fun day where you use the assets we already have, plus seeing what else can be grouped together so that we actually can combine our marketing and or yeah, social media focus on a specific area to draw attention to some of the unique assets we already have. Okay.
I mean, we should actually also check with the in the various, you know, with the Rundle Mall type people. I mean, all of the city's businesses have things. It's a case of can we commercialize them in a sense?
You can't unmute yourself.
Bring the people in.
There you
So, thank you.
Can anyone hear me?
Were you done, Franz?
Yes, I've done. Go for it.
Excellent. Thank you. Councillor Couros, over to you.
Sorry, can I be heard? Because I'm not sure if yes, all good. I have to say that we have already the administration has really thought through from previous conversations that we had in regards to lighting and the cycling part and the walking side of things and in our city. But I 100% agree with the Lord Mayor in the sense that we need to bring the people here into our city and give them a purpose to come here. And, you know, in regards to exercising, and our parklands offer an abundance of that already. I went to the East Parklands over the weekend, and there's a fabulous circuit there that you can train in. It's fantastic. And riding your bike around the parklands and having that experience is great. But I would like to have a focus
purpose of activities that can be drawn into our main streets for the businesses. I think that's all part of the recovery, and having these walking tours. I mean, of course, under COVID, we would have these smaller cluster of groups that we can be able to organise and be able to have people come through the city and experience the city for a purpose. And in that, they're here in the city and they can, you know, expand on that after that tour that they've had. So I think the focus has really got to be to bringing people back in with a purpose. Rather than spreading it out again. And if, I mean, I'm not saying that the parklands are, you know, don't offer that, they do, but I'm just worried that with part of the recovery, it's going to stay there and not bringing the focus back to our businesses in the main streets that we keep talking about in this recovery. That's basically the focus that I want to bring to this discussion is in regards to, you know, bringing that focus to the main streets, but also in saying that, you know, I think that we need to be a little bit mindful, of course, of, you know, of the aspect of, you know, Rundle Mall as well. And with retail, I would like to see us progress more into a digital style platform. I know there's costs associated with that, but something at people's fingertips, you know, whether it's signage, I don't know how we're going to do that in the cost factor, but something they've got in the palm of their hands, hopefully in an app. I don't know the costs associated with that, that they know what's on offer in the city at the tip of their fingers. And I really think that that is the way to go. People are time poor and we need to send that message, not only through people trying to search things, but for it to be available for them on their phone in regards to retail. And I think we really need to think about that over the long term as well. That's all.
Thank you, Mary. Councillor Kira. I think it's coming. There we are.
Thanks, Chair. Agree with all of the previous comments. I think everything has been very productive and useful so far from all the councillors and the administration and from the public. I would just add, let's be mindful perhaps of addressing any perception that we're not leaving our non-leisure service and goods providers in the city behind. Psychologists, accountants, you know, watchmakers, that all of those sorts of people. So the free parking days, that's an obvious one to think about, but anything else that might address that very, very substantial cohort as well as all the other initiatives, I think would be useful.
Thank you, Councillor Kira, for that thoughtful addition. Perhaps a pop-up free car park is a good idea. Councillor Abrahimzadeh.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, going back to Councillor Kouros's point about digitising. I think most people, if not everyone, has probably noticed that a lot of businesses, because of COVID-19, went online. So there are a number of hospitality businesses that started to deliver their products themselves. They started to jump on other online platforms like Deliveroo, Uber, and others. And I think, given all the chatter now about the new norm, you know, social distancing, 4 square meters per person, this sort of stuff is going to hang around for a while. I think having some sort of a digital strategy citywide would probably be something that we need to work on. Maybe, and I've put this in as part of the ideas that I put forward, and I guess I don't think the idea came along all that clearly, but it's essentially turning everything that we have here in the city of Adelaide, not just the businesses that we have, but everything that we have, and that includes any sort of walking or cycling trails, our heritage, anything and everything that we do have within the city of Adelaide, putting that on a digital platform and essentially having virtual Adelaide or an e-mall, if you like, but more than just promoting businesses, promoting anything and everything that there is in the city of Adelaide, and hopefully that will be one way that we can attract people to the city. Like I said, I've put this idea forward before, but I just wanted to expand on it because I don't think that came across very clearly. Thanks, Chair.
Through the chair, I might just confirm that, yeah, we have got the one-stop shop concept that's being explored at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christy. Councillor Donovan.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, I think all of the ideas that have come through are interesting and useful. One of the things, and I know administration already does this, but I think for all of us to keep in mind when we're decision making is that the elements that make the community more livable are directly correlated to business success. So we know that everything that we can do that contributes to residential amenity and building wellbeing within our residential community directly correlates to successful business because we're attracting more people to the CBD. And we know that one of the highest predictors of local business success is population density. So the more we can make this a community that is thriving, the more we lead to a business community that is thriving. So as we're looking through all of these points to consider and ideas to consider, it's not separating out what's benefiting the community and what's separating business. It's recognising that everything that we do that creates a thriving local community leads to a thriving local business environment. Just making that point as we're thinking about our decisions.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, may I just comment that this has got a community-led recovery process, hence the engagement of our team and the Splash team, and the consideration that the hashtag MyAdelaide is very much about re-engaging, embracing the community from the heart.
Thank you, Christy. Members, were there any further contributions, ideas? I think pretty much everyone has contributed except Councillor Martin. Councillor Martin, did you have any ideas to throw into the mix here? Sorry, I can't see your face. Let me. No. No. Alrighty. I just. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. I see he's trying to say something, but he's not.
Sorry, he's fallen off my screen. That was not intentional. Let me just try and, sorry, it's hard to find you, Phil, when the hand's not up because you're buried in, I'm assuming you're Philip's iPad. I think, is that? Yep. Okay, you're live. Welcome back. Or not. Sorry, Phil. Are you talking, Phil?
Yep.
It's something. Sorry, the signal. I think we're having those North Adelaide dropouts again. Apologies. No, it is. Do you want to just try? Let me try and mute and unmute and see if that assists. Any luck? Any luck, Councillor Martin? Can you hear us? Yeah, we can't hear a thing you're saying. Is it just check your Zoom and just ask that it's not wanting you to connect your audio, because I can't hear anything, but your video is very clear. Is there an orange icon flashing? No. Oh, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. Oh well, the Dropbox has been sent around to all members, so if you wish, you can contribute via those means. We'll just mute you again to be sure you won't interrupt. Just a quick comment I might make. I think those are all very lovely ideas, and the community-led initiatives are a very good thing to get to generate that interest and to see what's out there in the community. I would just reiterate Councillor Kouros's point that the whole point is to be bringing people into the city and to make sure they don't just get sort of stuck at the parklands threshold, and to make sure they're coming in further than that. So ensuring that we can try and connect those activities in the parklands with the businesses is really important. Again, I think Councillor Kouros alluded to it, but I'll just try and make the point more explicitly. Those heritage tours, those walking tours, they should start and finish at our main streets. So you can start at Hutt Street or O'Connell Street at 10 o'clock, and that'll increase the chances of people perhaps having brunch there or breakfast, and you can finish there later in the day or just after lunch, around 1, and so you'll increase the chance of them having lunch there as well. That's the sort of level of thought I think hold due to health concerns. Now that's regarding public use. It's probably worth looking into, and I know there were some ideas on the drawing board for be as possible, but nevertheless I'll chuck it into the mix. But the final point I'd say is that bringing people in, when we saw that graph earlier and we saw that there were 350,000 visitations per day on average in that busier period in late February, and we're now down to less than 50,000 visitations. We got to remember that in no small part, it was the businesses that make up our community here in the city that built that in the first instance. And so we should be really leveraging off them because they are experts. They're the ones that bring people into their businesses. They're the ones that know how to do it. I think something such as a shop front incentive scheme, which I know we've done in the past, or possibly looking at grants for businesses as well, smaller grants, but grants for businesses to increase their confidence and increase the likelihood of them reopening as well. A $2,000 or $3,000 grant to a small business might be the difference between them actually reopening their doors or not. And so I think it's something to bear in mind, but equipping them so that they can do what they do best is perhaps the best way that you'll actually get people into the city en masse like we had before. They did it once, they can do it again. All the work that you guys are doing is fantastic, and I know it's all pushing towards that, but just to leave you with those ideas as well. And if you wanted to respond to that, I can unmute you.
Thank you. Back through the chair. Look, just in closing, both Christy and myself are always available and also online. So if you have more ideas from yourselves as elected members or the communities that you're mingling with, please pass them on. We're trying to assess those almost on a daily basis. So we're trying to be very quick, very nimble, and get some things happening out on the street that are visible. So you will see some things. Apologies if you don't see everything in advance from us, but that's part of collecting this information and getting on with it. We're also very keen on projects that can create some legacy here too. So short-term things that might be a permit-driven response that ends in a legislative response is going to be fantastic. Particularly some of that social distancing around laneways to start with could start to open up more of the city down the track as health conditions allow. So thanks again for your time tonight. And Christy and myself have got our contact details. Please feel free to contact us direct as you see fit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Christy. With that, we'll move to 4.4, which is the workshop on the unsolicited proposal guidelines. And I'll just ask the CEO if he can kick us off. Mark, you are unmuted.
Thanks, Chair. Nothing like a bit of governance to finish the night off, and I'm going to save the best to last for you. Tonight, in line with the resolution of Council, we're discussing the review of the unsolicited proposal guideline. You'd be aware that the current guideline is suspended as resolved by Council recently. So I guess we've actually used the guideline specifically for the Adelaide Football Club proposal, it's good to review the process against how we went. And I know some of you are quite comfortable with the use of the guideline, and some of you are clearly not comfortable with the use of the guideline. And from my point of view, I think there is a place for unsolicited proposal guidelines for local government, just as there is for state and federal government. And the guidelines really enable the private sector to bring forward unique ideas to council. And there's no doubt that the key intent of the guideline was to provide a clear framework to operate from within and to respect third parties' intellectual property, which is always a delicate matter in local government. I realise there are some challenges with the unsolicited proposals. We have competing objectives. We have transparency considerations and confidentiality considerations, and all those things are kind of difficult for the local government to deal with. Traditionally, you'd know that we've used expressions of interest in the past. There's no doubt that it's a good way for council-led initiatives, and one of those things was the 10 Gig Adelaide project was undertaken through an external expression of interest process. But I must say that the expression of interest process isn't a replacement for an unsolicited proposal process. They are different, and the guidelines that we have ensures that we have governance and probity frameworks in place. And having this kind of framework is considered to be important because it kind of enables the private sector to approach council with innovative ideas because we can provide a clear and robust governance and probity framework for them. And we confirm that their ideas would remain confidential unless and until council decides it wants to consult on those issues as part of the process to advance the ideas. So it could be said that we don't give anything away by having an unsolicited proposal process. We've adopted the process following the Gilman decision, which was quite I guess, a concerning decision that impacted on the state government some time ago. And so having an unsolicited proposal guideline somewhat responded to that situation. And so the process we have at the moment and allows us to have a process where council makes all of the decisions and can technically withdraw at any time. And I must say that recognising that this may not always be as easy as you might think. And, we have community and political perspectives that impact on that ability to withdraw. So all in all, I think it's really timely for us to have a look at the guidelines to see if they should be amended or not. And tonight we have Brett Carland and Rudy here who are going to help us to respond to any questions you have and to take any feedback. So happy to hand back to you, Chair, to respond to any questions that council members may have. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Sorry, let me just get this screen up here. So sorry, Mark, did you want Brett to continue on with a little bit? Or?
Well, I think that the slides are self-explanatory. I think we'd probably be more productive if we just respond to comments and questions, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I'm happy to. With that, Councillor Simms was first.
Thank you, Chair. Look, thank you to administration for organising this workshop. From my perspective, it's a very welcome discussion. Members will recall I've tried twice to remove the parklands from the unsolicited bids process, and this workshop was billed by some elected members as an opportunity to work through these issues. So I look forward to every member speaking on the matter and having a clear view, and us coming away from this with a clear position. I think that's very important for the community. In terms of feedback, my personal view is pretty clear, but just to restate it for the benefit of this review, I'd like to see the parklands removed from the unsolicited bids process. I think that I can understand the rationale for an unsolicited bids process. but I do have real concern around how that is applied to public space. And I think when you're having discussions about public space that belong to the community in common, those discussions shouldn't be happening behind closed doors. And I feel very uncomfortable with a process that allows private entities or private corporations to bid for our public land behind closed doors. I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong in a democracy. And I think that a lot of the issues this council has faced over the last 18 months have been because of the cloak of secrecy that was adopted in its dealing with the proposal from the Crows. And I don't want to see us repeat that process again. So my view would be public land, you need to have public discussion, and the unsolicited bids process makes it very, very difficult for us to have clear engagement with the community because of intellectual property concerns. So to address the questions, I am comfortable with the general unsolicited. It should not apply to the parklands. And I think if we remove this, remove the parklands from the guideline, that would give clarity to potential applicants and clarity to the community, many of whom have been very, very concerned about a process that has allowed.
How about now? Oh, you're back. Oh, we missed you.
Yes, lovely to speak to you. I do note the administration has spent a great deal of time and effort developing this, and I thank them particularly for the references from the World Bank mentioning that one of the downsides of USP frameworks, as they call them, are a lack of competition and transparency, perceptions of corruption and fraud, and low quality infrastructure assets and or services. And additionally, I thank them also for the ACCC warning that unsolicited proposals could be, in fact, worse for taxpayers than better for them. My concern is that parkland should never have been included in this process. It was an oversight of the previous council, but one of the assurances that was given to the previous council was that if any bid was deemed to be inappropriate, counter to council values or community values, then it could be called in, withdrawn immediately. And of course, we've just seen that that's not likely in circumstances where a majority of councillors favour a particular position. The current rules allowed the parklands to be put under threat from the Adelaide Crows with the support of the team, even though there was substantial community opposition, substantial concerns from many councillors saying that it needed to be a more transparent process. And despite the concerns that the consultation process that eventually emerged was less than adequate. So even though there was supposed to be a protection, it didn't work, it failed. And therefore, it is my view that the parkland should be withdrawn from the unsolicited bid process. And given that they are public parklands, that is the property of South Australia, defined as such by state parliament's legislation, then that ought to be a public process in every circumstance. As to the broader concept of unsolicited bid processes for other projects, particularly for council property, I'm agnostic. Certainly the experience of the Crows bid was such that I think it leaves something to be desired, but perhaps we could review the bid process for non-parklands considerations, and it may be best to engage a third party. Perhaps we could engage one of the parties that we've presently engaged for the Hutt Street rules or organisational culture, one of those, to have a look at this broader picture of applying unsolicited bid processes to non-parklands assets. I do hope it comes to council and to a vote. I think it needs to be clarified, and certainly in the broader community, there is, in my view, absolutely no tolerance for any kind of future bid for parklands for any large-scale commercial activity. Oh, and Chair, I need to go. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh. Councillor Kira, you're live.
Yes, Chair. Look, I don't agree with pretty much all of the preceding comments, and I reject entirely the characterisation of the Crows episode as any kind of failure of the unsolicited bid guidelines whatsoever. That failed or stalled for purely commercial reasons because of COVID. If anything, the problem we faced were that the guidelines, there were some issues that might be finessed in the guidelines that made it difficult for the Crows to put their proposal forward. I think it was a very good proposal, and it's good proposals like the Crows one, which involve the use of existing commercial structures and having the usage of those commercial structures within the existing footprint. So that's a very important distinction when it comes to what may technically be parklands. So I don't think the guidelines should be made. I would suggest that the guidelines are quite good overall, should be retained. I would add that we ought to consider making things more easy, making us more approachable to the private sector. I think what has happened now, the crisis we're under has illustrated more than ever before that we need the private sector to come in and be partners with us. We want to encourage them to do this. We want them to feel confident that they'll be able to do so without their proposals being leaked to the public. We want some strong privacy provisions, I think, in the guidelines, if that's applicable. And I think we want them to be confident that they won't be used and abused as political footballs, if you pardon me using that particular term. So I think overall, let's keep the guidelines and let's make things easier, safer and better for the private sector to come in and become partners, because we need them.
Thank you, Jesse. Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Well, I'm sort of sitting somewhere between the two of you, because I do think that there were some failures with the unsolicited proposal guidelines, which is why we're here now. And I really echo the sentiment. I would really like to hear from each of you the things that you think worked and didn't work, so we can do a proper review of those guidelines. The key failure was actually the engagement of the Adelaide Parklands Authority, and which we missed a step in terms of the guidelines. So, I mean, there's no other process for a $65 million venture to come to us with the protection around IP and confidentiality. It's a matter of, and I do actually think that the consultation, because there was no decision ever made, the consultation was was a process that we went through. I think it was 14 weeks, which was endorsed by council. And yes, it was very polarising in terms of those in support and those against. But that's the point of a consultation, so that you can actually ask people what they think. And I still stand by that, because, you know, there weren't decisions made. The decision we made was to take it out to the public and see what they think. I do, with my, I have got my council hat on now, but from an APLA perspective, it should have come in sooner. It should have been a discussion with APLA because it was in the parklands, and I do think that there is something around the process that is missing. So it's the process, not necessarily the guidelines themselves, but the application of those guidelines. The other thing which I have difficulty with is the criteria of unique, because that is a subjective criteria. That is not an objective criteria. Each of us will think of something different when someone says the word unique. An innovative commercial proposal, I get that, but it is that criteria of unique that I think is almost impossible for us to apply. And if that is impossible to apply, what is the criteria that we would accept something? So I do actually think we need to really tease out the criteria so that collectively we're really, really clear as to whether something's going to go through stage 1 or 2. And the other one is like, what triggers something from going from an unsolicited bid proposal to an expression of interest? So I'm really keen to understand, obviously they're trying to, if they came in through an unsolicited bid, they've come up with a innovative commercial proposal. They want to protect their IP, they want to protect confidentiality, or even through an expression of interest, as we have all seen, members, through the work that we've done on the Adelaide Central Market Arcade and 88 O'Connell. We do know how to keep confidentiality when we go through an extensive expression of interest process. So, so in terms of, I think, I agree completely, Jessie, in terms of we need to work in terms of public-private partnerships. We've done some great work, even our 100% procurement of electricity through renewable sources is in essence a public-private partnership, and the outcomes of that are exceptional. But what we need to do is, while protecting the IP and the confidentiality, we need to have a process that we can assess whether it's going to get through gate 1 or gate 2. And I thought it was very interesting to see the numbers that have gone through New South Wales compared to what's actually come out the other end. I know APLA has asked to see the revised guidelines, and I wonder whether there should be any differentiation in our minds between a brownfield and a greenfield site, between something on an existing footprint or not. If I think of unique, I can't think of anything really that would pass a unique criteria for me. So that is one of the key things. I'll just check my notes. In terms of threshold, I'm not even sure there needs to be a threshold, but you know, obviously the threshold we've got, which is over 100,000, leans towards something that is major. And so if it's, you know, I think it's good to have it there because there are some difficulties in terms of how we bring things in through council, and that alongside a really clear expression of interest proposal. Maybe there's a different trigger to bring things into council that we need to also explore, so that because there's a problem that I was actually talking to Claire about a few things that happened when I was actually at council as a general manager that never saw the light of day because we had no mechanism to bring them into the chamber. So this is a mechanism to bring things before the chamber, but I think that we need to go back to the criteria that we want to apply, and we need to make sure that if anything addresses the parklands, it goes before APLA and there is an engagement very early on in the process, and that that's part of actually what we need to assess. Thank you.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Councillor Abrahimzadeh. There we go.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I'll just echo everyone's feedback, not everyone's, but I think Councillor Kera made a good point around public-private partnerships. Now that we are going from a crisis phase of COVID-19 into the recovery and rebuilding phase, public-private partnerships will be important to stimulate our economy. That's one point. The next point is around stakeholder engagement, and I agree with what the Lord Mayor was saying around better engagement. It's better engagement of all of our stakeholders. that includes all the, I guess, all the relevant authorities, not necessarily the Parklands Authority, but all the relevant authorities that we have a relationship with. But also, I guess, it includes the chamber and the elected members as well. There was a point around the Parklands. I personally think that we shouldn't exclude the Parklands from this guideline, purely because, and I think, Chair, you made a point of this, purely because if later on down the track a great idea comes to council around maintaining or managing or surveying the Parklands, we really need to look at that proposal, not have a blanket approach and cross it off just because it includes the Parklands. Personally speaking, I think having discussions, commercial and confidence discussions are important. And the reason for that is because we need to make sure that we get bang for buck for our ratepayers. State government does this, federal government does this, and they do it in order to get bang for buck for taxpayers. And we need to make sure that we have similar sort of processes to make sure that we do get bang for our ratepayers. We're here to work for our ratepayers, so we need to make sure that those commercial and confidence conversations happen. In saying that, I think that when it comes to engaging with our ratepayers, our residents and businesses, we probably need to take that into account when it comes to revising these guidelines. I think we can do a better job at that. I don't think that the previous proposal that came to us allowed for that. So I think there's some work that needs to be done there. That's about it from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Oman. Robert, I'll just because you've spoken before, I'll just go straight to Helen first. Helen,
Thanks.
there it is.
Just a question of admin. In the absence of an unsolicited bid process, are there examples in recent history that we could use to consider what may otherwise happen? And I guess I wasn't on council, but I'm thinking of things like the tree climb, for example. It was novel, it was commercial. When those sorts of topics arise in the absence of an unsolicited bid process, what would be the alternative? Because I can think of other situations where we've had commercial in confidence discussions, but not specifically necessarily where it has been a proposal that hasn't come to us via other means. So although we're having this discussion around there's no other method by which this can occur, it would seem as though if there's something that needs to be covered as commercial in confidence, then it comes to us as commercial in confidence. I can appreciate the additional structure of the unsolicited bid process might put a bit more of a framework behind it, but could that conversation not still occur and it comes to us as commercial in confidence and we then make a decision going forward?
I think one of the key challenges in the absence of having a guideline is that it doesn't instill confidence to the market that council will respect their intellectual property. It gives them no security as to how they will be treated, and it runs the risk that we may not be consistent or perceived to be inconsistent in how we treat proposals that come through. Certainly, I think if we want the flexibility to receive direct approaches from the market, then in order to receive and assess them, that we should have a formal framework to govern that. And that's certainly been the finding through the Gilman. The alternative is that we won't have a framework, and essentially that's going to signal to the market or discourage them from directly approaching us. Or if they do approach us, we won't have a process in place that establishes a clear probity framework, and that has an inherent risk attached to it. They are some of the key challenges in not having a framework. I think certainly my desktop research is indicating that as a global phenomenon in the last decade, these sorts of frameworks are emerging and increasing. Every state and territory now has one. Many local government authorities are now starting to also implement them. So I think they're here to stay. And I think really my advice would be is best not to prohibit direct engagements from the market, but look at a process and how we can appropriately manage them. I think that would be my best advice, bearing in mind that unsolicited proposal frameworks, and certainly in the Australian jurisdiction, they all generally have the option for the relevant government or agency to undertake a competitive market engagement process. So if the uniqueness criteria, which as we sort of has been demonstrated is a very difficult threshold, is not only having an innovative idea, it's demonstrating you are the only person in the market that can execute it. That is why many fail. But they all have that reservation that we can put this out to a competitive marketplace. So you've got those options. We didn't pursue that option in the specific scenario with the Adelaide Football Club proposal, but we do have that under the guideline that if we think it's a good idea, but it doesn't justify a direct negotiation, we can, whilst attempting to respect some of the commercial intellectual property, their idea, their know-how, we can put concepts out to the market and test it. So we can leverage that through this process and get the benefit of it.
Okay, that's useful. Thanks, Brent.
Chair, would it be okay if I just shared a little background around treetops, because it was a interesting process in the absence of having an unsolicited guideline?
I was going to ask a question myself when it was my turn, so please.
Sorry, it's just Councillor Donovan asked specifically about that project.
Yeah, go into it. Shoot.
Okay. Yeah, so it was an unsolicited bid that came to us.
Or was not, did you say?
No, it was, but we didn't have a policy to deal with it. So what we did was come to council to under our usual confidentiality provisions. And actually the Parklands management strategy at that time did talk to commercial recreation activities. So what we then proposed in the absence of having a policy that has since been developed was we recommended to council that they do an EOI to talk to recreational activities of a commercial nature for a specific Parklands area. And through that, we were still able to respect the commercial integrity and the ideas of the tree climb. But then the assessment criteria against which it was viewed was obviously through the Parklands management strategy. And so that talked to increasing visitation, increasing activity. And obviously work with APLA and with council through that process. It's really tricky because what you're managing is the ideas and the commercial integrity. But the council at the time obviously respected that every step of the way. And we need to then manage the proponent as well to make it really clear that it's public land where there needs to be public value. And so there's no guarantee at any point in time that you'll be the successful proponent, because what the EOI process did was set the outcome through the strategy and then ask the market to bring that to life. So it certainly brings more risk from a proponent's perspective. But we ended up with an outcome, I think, that the majority of people felt was acceptable for that part of the parklands.
Yeah, thanks. So that seems like a good example of where, of course, there's always pros and cons, but yeah, useful to see how an alternate process went through. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. And I'll skip you again, Rob, and go to Mary. She hasn't said anything yet.
That's okay. I'm happy for Rob to go ahead if he likes. He's been holding on there, so I was after him.
Looks like he's going to burst, doesn't he? No, that's right. Go, Mary. Shoot.
I'd like to say that it was a process that all councillors honoured and went through. And I understand there was a lot of political games in regards to this unsolicited bid process with the Adelaide Football Club. But in saying that, we just standing our ground and allowing us to go through this process actually highlighted what we needed to maybe change, or in regards to this policy. I do agree with Arman and the Lord Mayor in saying that we needed a better engagement, and I think that's the step that was missing. And it was really clear that we hadn't engaged in regards to this particular process with the football club, that the APLO weren't properly engaged in regards to the guidelines. And you know, maybe in regards to parklands, you know, we needed to probably take that first step initially, rather than going through that whole process without consulting with them. So I think the key driving here is to have better engagement with stakeholders wherever it shall be. I don't want to miss out on opportunities potentially like something like the tree climb. There is things that we could possibly be using our parklands for, with activities that could bring benefit to the city, because after all, we are a capital city, and that is, you know, highlight, you know, we all value our parklands. There was no one on council here at all that was suggesting that we build on the parklands. There was an existing commercial building that we were looking at that is in dire straits of support to continue being there, and that's another conversation. The focus on every elected member was the aquatic centre, but you know, of course, some were more passionate about it taking the focus away from it being actually about the aquatic centre. So I would like to, I mean, I don't know, but Brett made some very good points, and I've taken those on board in what he said, and they were very clear, you know, the potential of the unsolicited bid and what we could miss out potentially if this is not structured properly. And I think I would like to keep going with this type of policy, but I think we need to structure it a bit better, especially in regards to our parklands, in regards to engagement and seeking further clarification how we can do those steps.
Thanks, Mary. Councillor Sims.
Thanks, Deputy Lord Mayor. Look, I just wanted to highlight the example that Deputy CEO Claire provided. Just because we don't have or just because we could have a situation where the parklands don't fall within the remit on the unsolicited bids guideline, doesn't mean that we wouldn't have proposals for the parklands for third parties. That's happened before we developed this guideline. It could easily happen after. The key point for people to remember is that the guideline places restrictions on the extent to which we can inform the community about proposals that are coming before council. That's the key element that I think is really problematic when we're talking about public land. And taking the debate about the aquatic centre and the Crows aside, you all know my views. But I think one of the really problematic aspects of that was the fact that there was not consultation with the community and there were restrictions placed. And I take the point the Lord Mayor and others have made about engaging with the Adelaide Parklands Authority, but it's bigger than that. There wasn't consultation with the community. And that was because the proposal fell within the unsolicited proposals guideline. And so I just want members to think about that. It doesn't mean if we take the parklands out of this framework that we can't ever have proposals for the parklands, but it means that we're freer to develop our own process and to develop a process that might be more open and transparent to the community. I think that's a really important point for people to remember. The other point I did want to raise further to the Lord Mayor's point about uniqueness, I had real problems with the understanding how the proposal we had from the Adelaide Crows fell within that framework. And I think that is illustrative of some of the problems that we have within the unsolicited proposals guideline. I mean, ideally what we would have done is had a discussion with the community and as elected members about how we wanted to deal with the aquatic centre. And then if the consensus view of the council was that they wanted to engage a third party, then we would have had an open EOI process and gone to the community to determine who, gone to the market to determine who best was going to fall within that. The unsolicited bids process, I think, made the whole thing really problematic. And I think that nuance is being lost by some of the members here. This isn't about saying there'll never be anything for the parklands. I mean, I have a particular view on those sort of proposals, as you know, but the unsolicited proposals guideline makes it very difficult for us to deal with proposals from market for the parklands in an open and transparent way. And I think that point shouldn't be lost. The other thing I want to highlight for the purposes of the review is I think that there are issues with the guideline more broadly, particularly when it applies to public buildings. So to give an example, if we had a proposal from a private operator, an unsolicited bid for, say, our libraries or a community centre or something like that, I do think it's problematic that, again, the secrecy would apply and there couldn't be the level of consultation with the community because of these IP issues. So for me, this needs a lot more work. At a bare minimum, I think we do need to carve the parklands out and develop an alternative process for how those matters are dealt with. But I also think there are issues around proposals for public assets and public buildings, because again, to go back to my original point, if the public owns it, I think the public has a right to be engaged. There's something very wrong if the public can't hear about proposals that are being put forward. And quite frankly, I think the market needs to understand that if you're going to engage with the city council that represents the residents and ratepayers, that there are certain hoops that you're going to have to jump through in terms of community consultation. By taking the parklands out of this guideline, we can determine what those parameters are. And I think that's what we should be doing as a council.
Thanks, Rob. Mark, I see your hand up and I've pressed unmute. There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just might ask Brett to clarify, just in relation to the fact that the suggestion is that the guidelines impose restrictions on council with stakeholder engagement. Could you just assist the council members to understand what restrictions are in place with stakeholder engagement and otherwise? Thanks.
The guidelines don't speak specifically to stakeholder engagement. What the guidelines speak to is that it gives a message to the market that should they put in a direct proposal to council, we will respect their intellectual property. It doesn't prohibit council from undertaking any required or necessary public consultation once a proposal has reached a certain stage where it's deemed appropriate to engage the community. The reality is, if we don't give some sort of formal undertaking to respect intellectual property, which is broadly defined not just to be registrable intellectual property, but also know-how and innovative ideas that clearly have a commercial value to proponents, then they're going to be discouraged from putting in bids. It's as simple as that. It's almost a case of we can't have our cake and eat it. You can't expect the marketplace to proffer their sensitive know-how without any support or security that we will respect it or protect it, and that we may just take their idea and put it out to their competitors who may underbid them. It's just not something that I think the market is going to be receptive to, because it's not in their interests. And I think there has to be a level of compromise in the market, that if we want to say we are open for business to explore your innovation and your IP, they're going to need, at a bare minimum, at least an undertaking that we're going to endeavour to respect it. Otherwise, I mean, what's their incentive to come and approach council? And I think, and I observe the comments in relation to the parklands, and I note the feedback. I think one of the challenges that I turn my mind to is if we jettison the parklands from this proposal, an expression of interest will certainly not be an appropriate form of market engagement for every type of proposal. It just happened to be convenient. It fit for the tree climbing. It won't work for everything. And one of the consequences could be that we're just encouraging those proponents to directly engage the state government with their proposals under their guideline and look at how they may legislate over us. So there are pros and cons that I think we just need to be aware of in terms of the parklands and how we deal with the parklands. But in terms of engagement, we can always engage, but we have to do so in a way that's respectful to commercially sensitive information. I hope that helps clarify to some extent the balancing act that effectively we have to try and be transparent to our constituents in terms of this is value for money, and we want to understand that this has got a community benefit, but also be fair to proponents in protecting their intellectual property. It is direct conflicting objectives with the very nature of these frameworks. And we've seen that not just firsthand with our own experience. This issue is prevalent internationally with these frameworks. There's no optimal solution is the best I can conclude.
Thanks, Brett. I'll just go to Franz because you haven't spoken yet, Franz.
That's correct. Yes, thank you. I mean, we are looking at a proposal at the unsolicited bid process, etc. And obviously, we've got a bit of a guideline and a framework how they're looking at doing that. But I think if we look at our recent example, I mean, first and foremost, someone comes to us and put that whatever that is aside, and the parklands is certainly an important asset, and we need to certainly look after it, and that we allow things that are appropriate. And of course, that's an opinion. That varies according to your stance. But if we look at that, the difficulty, I suppose, what I see is that if someone comes with a broad concept and they ask something, and they put it to us, and that length of time between that and where we're able to get to consultation was quite a long time, but it also allowed a lot of uninformed and inaccurate, not information, I won't call it information, but points of view that made any process very difficult. And obviously that created a lot of anxiety and a lot of upset. And obviously that's what, I mean, you're trying to engage people. Let's think about that as the issue. And by the time we got to talking to the community, there was a really long, strong entrenched views. But I'm getting at mainly that it is about not being afraid of innovation. And yes, we do need to be careful, but we also need to feel comfortable that we're managing it. And we weren't able to manage that simply because the public rhetoric and that over a very, not discussing it as a proposal or as a concept, was more about, want this, have it or not have it. And if you put that across other ideas that people are going to bring forward, you want them to be able to bring ideas forward. And I mean, the tree climb is one, that is, which is, as an example we can have. You don't want to stifle that conversation, stifle those ideas, but you do wish to be able to manage the process. And that's what we need to worry, what we need to concern ourselves with. Do we have the checks and balances in our process that allows their ideas to come to a point where they're fleshed out sufficiently that you can start to make an opinion on the concept, not on a separate point where you do or don't want something. But out of that may also come, even if it's not something that works, it may also help us to look at other proposals and ideas and actually come out with something and come up with some other concepts that will help us a lot. So I think, there does need to be a process. Things do need to be included, and we're just going to be cautious that we've got enough. And going to Apple, etc., is certainly a way. But it's also that we're enabling the conversation, and exactly to Brett's case, that we need to enable people with ideas to come forward, because otherwise we're not going to get any, and we're not going to have any proposals that are going to help the city or bring us something unique. And, you know, we always open ourselves up for a bit of risk, you know, with some of these ideas, but that is our role to manage those things on behalf of the proponent and also the community.
Thank you, Franz. Robert, just conscious of time, so a quick comment.
Yeah, thank you. Look, it's just a bit of a question, and I take on board. It's very clear to me that Brett has a clear view that the status quo is okay. He's articulated that, but I guess I'm just trying to deal with this issue around the community consultation under the existing approach, because I'm sorry, my experience was not that the community could be engaged. I understand the guidelines may not specifically say there is no community engagement, but under the guise of protecting IP, community consultation was blocked at every step of the way with respect to the crows. And I'm just keen to understand a little bit further about the restrictions placed on communication with the public by the unsolicited bids guideline, because I'm not sure that's been properly fleshed out.
Well, I'll have a go. It is difficult. The current framework does not talk to specifically public consultation or engagement processes. If I look at other experiences that have been interstate, there has been very little, if not any, to no public consultation. And I think the question of what's appropriate in relation to a level of engagement will very much be dependent on a case-by-case basis, depending on the nature of the proposal. Some simply aren't that sensitive or don't attract that much public interest. The reality is a lot of the existing examples of proposals that have advanced have been public-private partnerships that involve the third-party consortia putting forward a lot of finance, whether they be toll roads or otherwise, that probably generally haven't sparked the level of community interest as the Adelaide Football Club proposal. And certainly I realise that brought this issue and crystallised this issue for us, but I don't have a lot of guidance in terms of other national or international experiences in relation to what is a good level of public consultation or engagement and how you weave that into an unsolicited proposal process. It's certainly a challenge, I think, that we faced, and I don't have the solution. I can only take that on notice and look at how we can better consider that and what those options might be. I think at this time, look, just because we respect confidentiality of intellectual property, that in my head and my mind doesn't restrict us from doing what we need to do to engage and consult with our community to ensure that we get value for them. It shouldn't prohibit that. It just needs to be somehow done in a way that's still sensitive to some sort of commercial intellectual property considerations and striking that right balance. So I think if we take that on notice as an exercise, we might be unique in our own framework as to how we address that, because I would suggest that very few that I have seen deal specifically with this issue.
Yeah, and look, I think that's an interesting point, Brett, and I guess I would say that there is something wrong with the process if in every other jurisdiction where it's applied, there is no community consultation. So, you know, that worries me, and that's why I think this is a conversation that we really need to have. And I don't think it's as simple to say, and I mean no disrespect to you, I appreciate your advice, but I don't think it's as simple to say, well, because the rules don't specifically deal with the issue of consultation, that there is open consultation, because that didn't happen in this case. And I'm very worried that we're going to just sleepwalk into repeating this fiasco again. And the campaign that we saw against the Crows is going to be a curtain raiser for something else, unless the council actually deals with this and takes action and prevents us from repeating this in the future. Just before we move on, Chair, I am keen to understand from Director Mockler a little bit more about how the process worked that she talked about earlier in terms of the tree climb. Is she still available to answer some questions around that?
Yeah, I'm sure Claire is available, but in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to take those discussions offline.
Well, this
look,
review
no,
has
she's
been
already-
about
she's
6
already
months in the
fleshed it out.
making, Deputy Lord Mayor, and been billed by you and others as being an opportunity, an essential opportunity to resolve this issue. So I'd be disappointed if we don't move towards resolution tonight.
Won't be the only bite we have of this.
Well, can I ask then what the steps will be next in terms of how we resolve this? I mean, is this going to just disappear into the ether, as I warned would happen with a workshop, or will there be some action taken?
I'm sure that Mark and or Brett will sum up in less than 20 seconds the steps from here.
Yeah, through the chair, some good comments tonight. Brett and I and the team will consider some of the suggestions and comments tonight. We'll come back to you with a further conversation so that we can be sure that we have at least had a conversation about the aspects that have been raised. Further to that, we'll come back to you at formal committee and council with any determination with regard to the guidelines. So there's a fair bit of work to be done. I can give you the commitment that we'll come back to you with more information as we unpack it from tonight. So this is not the only chance you'll have.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Sandy, was that did that give you satisfaction? You had your hand up. That answer covered it. Very quick comment. If I can just find you.
Thank you. It is a quick comment, but it is actually, look, you know, I understand what Rob's saying, but we did go to consultation. Whether we went to consultation at the right point and whether our consultation process was enough or as it should have been, we did go to consultation, and it was quite an impressive effort in terms of trying to get it to as many people as we did. I think in terms of Brett, I'm not sure how you work through that tension, but you know, consultation is obviously really important for us. We're local government, so it's actually at what point do we go to consultation, and actually how does that consultation framed as opposed to because we did do it. I think in possibly in not going out soon enough, what that allowed is a lot of misinformation and scaremongering happening out there, talking about 17 stories and barbed wire and cyclone fencing and all of this stuff that was just a nonsense. And, you know, and then the whole sort of, and it's all happening behind closed doors. Well, we were assessing a proposal and trying to work out how to take it to consultation. The upside is that we have had months of focused discussion, and we are finally looking at the aquatic centre in the way that the council needs to look at the aquatic centre. Yay. And the other thing is that we have a needs analysis, which again was triggered by the unsolicited bid. So if we can actually look at it in holistically and just say there's a few really good things. One is this discussion, two is the fact that we're concentrating on the aquatic centre, and three, that we've actually got a needs analysis we can now do some work on. I do think there absolutely needs to be some work done on the unsolicited guides proposal and what the triggers are, what the thresholds are, what the criteria are, how we engage with APLA and how we do our consultations. And I think that that's actually come from everybody pretty loud and clear tonight. I would also actually, to what you asked, Rob, in terms of more information, I think if we could ask Claire to perhaps distribute that, because I'd be keen to get that as well. And the other thing is that I'd be keen to know of examples where things haven't been able to come into council because there wasn't an unsolicited guides, proposals guideline, which didn't have a mechanism because of the people that were around it. There was no mechanism for that to come into the chamber. And I know one or two examples where that happened. So I think we need to have the full story, and I look forward to the next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. With that, I'll just make also, I think we have different definitions of brief, but that's okay. Sorry, I'm muted. I can't hear you. Look, just for context, this is needed to give certainty to the process. Now, I appreciate in some respects the process did not give certainty, But it did not create uncertainty. Uncertainty was created by the rampant fear-mongering that was undertaken on this issue. And that's what needs to be remembered as well. Now, what also needs to be remembered is the context in which this was designed and brought into council and approved as a policy last year. The Gilman land deal. The Gilman land deal, where on the eve of Christmas, almost 23rd of December 2013, the then state Labor government announced they were selling off tens of thousands of hectares of land. The day after, on Christmas Eve, half the Renewal SA board resigned because they had twice refused that very deal. And then it went on for a number of months after that. And we ended up getting a report handed down by the Independent Commission Against Corruption. So I don't think we should be removing the parklands entirely, because it actually leaves a huge gaping hole in what our policies are for dealing with parklands proposals and with those bids. That hole could be filled with corruption potentially, or maladministration. And that was the finding that Bruce Lander came to. It was maladministration. So we really, really do need a policy that handles this. I do appreciate the points that have been made around public consultation. That is precisely why Councillor Kouros and I, she moved it, I seconded a motion to depart from the unsolicited bids guidelines, and that's exactly what we did in order to take what little information we did have on the Aquatic Centre out to public consultation to reinforce and provide confidence to the public. That's what we did. We did depart already from the guidelines as they were, and in doing so, we got that proposal out to the public. In fact, we may have seen a situation due to the coronavirus pandemic where this proposal may have never seen the light of day and just been withdrawn, considering the Adelaide Football Club's current financial situation, because it was actually taking so long to get things drawn up. And that's partly our fault as a council with regards to working out what the need was, and that's partly, well, actually, it's wholly our fault, to be honest, because we were waiting on that in order to come through. So we got to remember the need, and as Councillor Abrahimzadeh said, unsolicited bids are there to give certainty. They're also there to catch all the other things, all the other ideas that come through. I think the idea that I floated at council when this came up was, what if someone came with a proposal to automate all of our lawnmowers in the parklands? We wouldn't have a process to deal with that. So there are things that we can do to the guidelines to make them different for parklands, whether that be putting an extra step of consultation in there and putting it in there earlier. That might be one way to do it, and we need to have that clear so that as Brett's alluded to, we can signal to the private sector that this is the point at which we expect your intellectual property to be in the public domain. And therefore, this is the point at which your intellectual property needs to be protected as much as possible so that no one takes it. That's a very easy legal principle to gather. We need to be able to give that certainty there to the private sector, because we will need to partner with them to deliver things in the future. So, and again, we do need that policy in place for all those other ideas that may come up. We're about to enter into an age of disruption, digitization, you know, all those sorts of things. So we need to have a process for dealing with new ideas that come from the community. Look, I'm not going to labour the point, but it seems that others now wish to labour the point. Look, 15 seconds, Rob. Conscious of time.
Oh, no, I was just pointing out, Chair, you said we had to move on, and you've now launched into a sort of 10-minute speech yourself, rehashing points that have already been made.
It's been less than 3 minutes, and you had 5 minutes.
I appreciate.
Sorry, Rob. Councillor Kouros, you've got 15 seconds as well.
What?
You're live.
Oh,
Look.
sorry. No, that was by mistake. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Did the administration wish to respond to anything there that was raised before we close the meeting? No. Mark, yes?
Just to confirm that it's been a good conversation, really helpful, and we'll come back to you with a further session just to be sure that we've understood your thoughts, and we'll do some research basically and consider what options we have. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Brett, as well. With that concludes the meeting this evening. Thank you, members and staff, for your attendance. Thank you.